Hey, what's up? It's Cute What If? This side. Today we will be seeing what if Deku turned into a baby. Before we move ahead with the FIC, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for future what ifs like this. Izuku POV. I walked down the street, carefully scanning each alley. Our class, 1A, had been patrolling the city for an hour when Mr. Aizawa alerted us that a villain had been spotted in our area. I searched everywhere, but I couldn't find him, and neither could anyone else from our class. We had been searching for 15 minutes, and the police confirmed that the villain had not left the area yet. Suddenly, my earpiece buzzed and I paused to listen. Attention students. The villain has stopped moving and is in square. Anyone nearby should be cautious. We still don't know this villain's quirk. My eyes widened. That was exactly where I was. I looked around and checked another alley, but when I saw nothing, I continued walking. Out of nowhere, a sharp pain shot through my back, and I gasped as I fell to the ground. Did the villain shoot me? Where was he? I glanced around, and through my blurry vision, I saw a man in black tying up another man in blue with a gray scarf on top of a building behind me. So that's where he was. Behind me on the rooftop. Aizawa had him, so everyone was safe now. The pain was overwhelming, and I closed my eyes, momentarily losing consciousness. Aizawa POV. I was leaping from rooftop to rooftop, searching for the villain reported by the police just minutes ago when I heard a scream from below. I immediately recognized that voice. Problem child number 1. I looked over and saw the villain we were after standing on a rooftop, laughing. I jumped up behind him, quickly tying him up with my scarf. I injected a sleeping agent into him, and soon enough, his body went limp in my arms. Looking down, I saw a concerning sight. Midoriya was lying on the ground, and from my vantage point, it looked like he was unconscious. I quickly scanned the area and saw Uraraka and Bakugo making their way over. Bakugo! Take the villain to the police. Uraraka! Help me carry Midoriya to the infirmary. Hurry! I yelled, getting their attention immediately. They both nodded, and Bakugo propelled himself to me. I handed him the unconscious body, and he blasted away with a few grunts. I rushed to Uraraka, who was already using her quirk on Midoriya. I knelt beside them and checked his pulse. It was steady, and he was breathing, which eased my worries. I examined him for any injuries, and finding none, I instructed Uraraka to take him away quickly. She nodded with a quick and nervous, "Yes, sir," and floated Midoriya behind her. After that, I reported the villain's capture to everyone via the earpiece and instructed everyone to gather back at UA in our common room. I swung from building to building using my scarf until I reached the police. I landed next to them and approached some officers who were loading the already awake but restrained villain into a police car. I grumbled and pushed a police officer aside. "What did you do to my student? Tell me what your quirk is," I demanded. The villain merely smirked, shaking his head. "You'll find out tomorrow, my dear pro-hero." I felt my anger rise, but before I could react, the police officers closed the car doors and told me to leave. I sighed and turned back toward UA. Suddenly, I heard a familiar gruff voice behind me. "Hey, did something happen to Deku?" I turned around to see Bakugo staring at me. I sighed and walked up to him. "I don't know. The villain shot him in the back when he wasn't looking. He's in the infirmary with Recovery Girl right now," I said, turning to leave. Bakugo blasted himself up, and I quickly followed. "Midoriya, please be okay." After that troublesome morning, the entire class 1A and Mr. Aizawa gathered in the room where a just-awakened green-haired boy sat on his bed. Recovery Girl sat next to him, and as everyone settled down, she began speaking. "I can't see anything wrong with Midoriya. He's breathing normally, and his blood pressure and pulse are stable. Basically, nothing has changed. He seems to be fully healthy. I think the villain was just bluffing," she finished, touching Izuku's forehead for the umpteenth time that hour. Aizawa sighed in relief. "That's one less thing to worry about. Is he good for lessons today?" Recovery Girl nodded. "Yes, he's fully healthy. Are you feeling okay, dear?" she asked, turning to Izuku, who was already getting out of bed. He turned to her and nodded with a smile. "Yeah, I don't think the villain did anything. The back pain is gone, and I feel normal. He shrugged. Recovery girl still seems suspicious. After all, what kind of person shoots their quirk at an enemy without causing any harm? Regardless, the whole class returned to their classroom, and lessons resumed as normal. The morning passed without incident, and everything continued as usual through recess, the middle session, and lunch. In the last PRD, Aizawa entered as usual and began class. Get out your hero notebooks. We will be reviewing the safety rules of a hero again because last week someone from a lower class made a mistake during their practice exam. Aizawa shook his head in disappointment and started writing on the board. Halfway through the lesson, Bakugo suddenly stood up. "Hey, I'm going to the bathroom," Bakugo stated, and Aizawa sighed and nodded. "Okay, you can go." Bakugo left, and everything continued as normal until... "Aha!" A scream echoed through the room. Aizawa turned sharply to see Izuku standing, clutching his head, eyes wide. Then he began to glow purple and shrink. Suddenly, the glow stopped, and everyone stared at the little 3-year-old boy standing next to his desk, gaping around. Soon, he started sobbing and then crying. Aizawa furrowed his brows but observed from a distance, knowing the safety protocols. The other students, however, rushed to the little boy, bombarding him with questions. "Wah, mommy! Get away, you scary people! It hurts! Mommy!" Izuku cried, wailing. Aizawa's mind clicked into place. He had reverted to the age of 3, which meant he only knew a few pro heroes and his one friend Bakugo. "Kids, get away from him now! Kirishima, get Bakugo! Hurry up! Yaoyorozu, get Recovery Girl immediately!" Aizawa yelled, and everyone immediately scurried away while Kirishima and Yaoyorozu rushed out of the classroom. Aizawa then walked up to the crying boy and knelt in front of him. "Hey Izuku, do you know me?" he gently asked, causing everyone to gasp at his unexpected gentleness. "Why yeah, pro hero Eraserhead. I want my mommy. It hurts. Everything hurts." Izuku continued to cry and wail. Aizawa sighed. "Don't worry, kid. We're all friends. Just calm down." But Izuku kept crying, pushing back against the wall as if trying to escape from the scary people. Suddenly, the doors burst open, and a very angry Bakugo stormed in. "What the hell, Aizawa? I was in the bathroom when someone yelled at me to come back." "What happened?" He trailed off as he spotted the source of all the commotion, a frightened little green-haired boy who looked terrified. "Bakugo, Midoriya has turned into a 3-year-old and has the mind of a child. He only knows his mom, you, and a few pros, but I can't calm him down. Please try," Aizawa asked him calmly. Bakugo glanced from the toddler to the pleading teacher, then to the rest of the class, and finally back to the crying toddler, who seemed unaware of the resemblance between them. Bakugo sighed and slowly approached the boy, who backed away, still clutching his head in visible distress. Aizawa quickly moved aside. Hey, calm down. It's me, Kachin. I'm just bigger now, see?" he whispered as everyone watched in shock. Izuku stopped crying and seemed to examine the boy kneeling in front of him. "Kachin," he sobbed. Bakugo nodded and sat cross-legged in front of him. "Don't worry, it's me. Can you see the similarities? I'm just an older version of you," he whispered as Izuku began to calm down and nodded. "Kachin," he then exclaimed and ran over to Bakugo, hugging him tightly. Bakugo squeezed him back and gently patted his head. "Shoo, calm down," he said, running his fingers through the soft green hair. "Kachin, the scary people." "Scary," the boy sobbed, and Bakugo continued to whisper reassuring words while petting his hair. "It hurts, Kane, it hurts," the boy cried, and Bakugo comfortingly patted his head. After some time, the little boy fell asleep in Bakugo's arms, and he stood up. "Huh, you must have really scared him." "See, I've always said you're scary," he smirked as he turned toward the rest of the class. They paid no attention to his remark, still shocked at how calm, kind, and gentle the blonde had just been. The door then opened, and Recovery Girl, along with Yaoyorozu, stepped in, panting. Recovery Girl glanced at the scene and commanded, "Bakugo, carry him to the nursery. Shota, organize your class." She then left with Bakugo, who held the sleeping boy in his arms. As soon as they left, Aizawa sighed heavily and stood up. Class is dismissed for the day, but nobody is to go near Midoriya's hospital room, he said, and everyone silently nodded. Bakugo's POV. I walked into the room and placed the sleeping mini Deku onto the bed, then sat down in a chair next to him. Recovery girl then came in, lowered some kind of machine over him, and closed the curtain so I couldn't see him. "Oi, what are you doing?" I asked, concerned about what was going to happen next. For some reason I felt really nervous for Deku. I didn't want him to be hurt, and seeing him in such pain earlier was painful for me too. I didn't know why, I never cared for the nerd before. But my pride seemed to melt when I saw him crying on the verge of a panic attack. Recovery girl looked at me and smiled. "I'm going to scan him to check what's going on." She then started the machine, and it quickly scanned the sleeping mini nerd. Recovery girl walked over to a computer and read the results. She nodded to herself, then turned to me. "Just like I thought," she mumbled. I raised an eyebrow, but then the door opened, and the caterpillar Aizawa walked in. He silently observed everything happening before turning to Recovery girl. "So," he asked. She sighed. The quirk Midoriya was hit with was an aging quirk. He shrunk to a 3-year-old, but right now he is still shrinking. Soon, he will be a 1-year-old. But no need to worry, he won't shrink any further. By Monday he will be 1. Then, every afternoon throughout this week, he will grow 1 year older. By Sunday he will reach 7 years old, and then the worst will happen. He will rapidly grow back into a 15-year-old, and because of the age difference, it will be very painful for him. He needs to be surrounded by only a few people he knows, not a crowd, but 1 or 2, and also things that he likes, which I assume are all my toys. "Bakugo, I need to ask you something." Recovery girl turned to me with a serious look. I nodded, signaling that I was listening, and she continued. "Midoriya only knows you and his mom right now, but his mom is on holiday in America. He doesn't seem to trust anyone else except for you and her, so please, could you take care of him for this week? And you have to be there for him on Sunday." She frowned. I scowled. "I have to babysit the nerd for a whole week?" She nodded, and I sighed. "Fine, but is the nerd okay?" I asked, glancing at the still closed curtain. "Oh yes, he has shrunk to a 1-year-old already." She opened the curtain, and I gasped as I saw mini Deku transformed into an even smaller version of himself. I sighed as the nerd slowly opened his eyes and began to cry. The sound was so pleading and sad that my heart melted, and I reached over to him. I patted his head and lowered him into my lap, rocking him gently. Then I remembered Recovery Girl was still there and looked up at her. "So? I don't have anything needed for babies in my room, you know," I said. She raised an eyebrow but then gasped and turned to Aizawa. "Shota, go get the things and bring them to his dorm room." Aizawa nodded and walked out. By now, Deku had stopped crying and was just lying in my arms, skiing on his thumb. "Don't worry, they won't go through your things, they'll just organize the baby items. By the way, can you feed him? He doesn't seem to trust me." She handed me a milk bottle, and I took it awkwardly. Sure." I placed the bottle in the little one's mouth and he giggled, causing milk to spray onto his face. I froze. That giggle was just so adorable. I gently pushed the bottle in and he began skiing on it, his eyes fixed on me. I sighed as I examined the tiny body in my arms and then heard Recovery Girl say, "Feed him, then play with him for a bit. After that, you can go back to your room, they'll be done by then." With that, the door closed, leaving me and the little one alone. I watched as he drank the entire bottle, then took it out of his mouth and placed it on a nearby table. The little one giggled again and suddenly, I had a great idea. I smirked at him and began to tickle him gently. He started laughing and squirming, and I enjoyed the delightful sound he was making. Soon, though, I stopped, not wanting to ruin his trust in me, and sat him up in my lap. I played with his hair for a while until I thought it was time to head back. I stood up, cradling the baby in my arm, and he instinctively grabbed my neck to hold on. I leaned down to the table and picked up a pacifier that was lying there, sticking it in his mouth. I smiled and walked toward the door. When I opened it, I heard shuffling and giggling. I glanced out the door, then at Deku, who looked at me with the same confused expression, and then we both looked back at the hallway. I shrugged and walked down the corridor to my room. When I opened the door, I saw that everything was indeed set up. A baby crib was in the left back corner of my room, a mat with toys spread out next to it, a little table with a blanket on top for changing diapers, a small fridge filled with baby food and bottles, and a cupboard stocked with all the necessary baby items. I sighed and placed baby Deku in the crib. Then I set up a new diaper and placed him on the changing table. He stared at me with wide eyes and I smiled back. I knew how to change diapers and care for kids because my mom had made me take a course on it a few months ago. How coincidental. I quickly changed the diaper, pushing aside all the strange thoughts that kept creeping in, and dressed Deku in clothes that actually fit him. I tossed his school uniform into the washing machine along with some of my own clothes. However, I forgot I had left Deku on the table, and that was a big mistake because he was always curious. When I returned, I gasped as I saw him crawling off the table. I rushed forward and caught him just before he hit the floor, sighing in relief. He giggled, and I smiled at him, surprised that this little one could bring me such joy. I quickly stuck the pacifier back in his mouth, lifted him up, and placed him in his crib. He frowned and started to whine. I shook my head. No, little Deku, it's sleepy time. Honestly, it wasn't, but I wanted him to sleep so I could have some free time. Of course, my luck was against me, as the clever baby began to cry. He shook his head and pouted. I sighed once again. Fine. I leaned over, took him out, and placed him on the play mat. He looked around and then up at me, as if asking for permission to play with the toys. Always asking for permission. This child is so much like Deku. Well, I guess it is him, so I shouldn't be surprised. I nodded and walked off to the bathroom. I glanced back to ensure that baby Deku was playing, and he was, so I took my clothes and headed into the bathroom. After a quick shower, I walked out and glanced over at the play mat. Suddenly, I dropped my towel in shock as I saw an empty play mat where baby Deku was supposed to be. I checked the clock on my desk and exhaled nervously. I had only been in the shower for 7 minutes. Where did he go? I walked to the front door and checked it, relieved to find it locked. I hadn't even noticed that a 1-year-old couldn't reach the handle, but I sighed in relief. I walked back into the room and grumbled, Deku, where are you? Suddenly, I heard something shuffle from under the crib and walked over to investigate. I knelt down and saw baby Deku under the crib, staring back at me with an all-might figure in his hands. I sighed. He was just playing under there. That adorable little Deku scared me half to death. I grumbled but stood up, and Deku crawled out after me. I turned to him. You scared me, you little rascal. He just giggled and reached out for me. I sighed for what felt like the 100th time that day and picked him up. He giggled again and hugged me. I froze for a moment but slowly hugged him back. Suddenly, Deku let out a wail and started crying. I stiffened and pulled back to look at him. His face scrunched up, and he began to squirm. I knew he was growing at that moment. I brought him back close and hugged him tight as he cried in my arms, feeling his body getting bigger. After some time, everything calmed down, and I looked at the now bigger baby Deku in my arms. I hugged him closer and wiped the tears from his eyes. He giggled at my touch but whined again. Hurry, hurry, he whined, and I nodded. Yeah, I know, baby Deku. I know it hurts, but you have to stay strong, okay? It will be fine later. I patted his head gently, playing with his hair, which seemed to soothe him. Once he stopped sobbing, I walked over to my bed and placed him there. He whined again, but I ignored him and walked over to the little fridge. I took out a bottle and some baby food labeled, "Feed this when he reaches the age of 2." I brought it back to my bed and set it on my bedside table. Then I walked over to baby Deku and put a bib on him. I sat down on my bed, placed Deku in my lap, and offered him the bottle. He accepted it without protest and began drinking. Once he finished, I set the bottle aside and fed him some food. He ate it all like a well-behaved child and then slumped against me, clearly tired. I gently laid him down and gave him a pacifier. After putting the empty containers back in the fridge, I returned to my bed and placed Deku on the floor. I glanced at the clock. It read 7:57 p.m., so I decided it was bedtime for him. I looked over and saw Deku crawling toward me. I smiled, picked him up, removed the bib, and placed him in his crib. I gently rocked the crib until the giggles and smiles faded, and Deku fell asleep. I sighed, changed into my pajamas, brushed my teeth, and collapsed onto my bed, quickly drifting off to sleep. Bakugo POV. I woke up to the sound of crying. Without needing to think, I knew it was baby Deku. I rolled my eyes and sighed, then got up and walked over to his crib. He stopped crying when he saw me, standing up and reaching out. I sighed again and lifted him out. I placed him on the mat and popped the pacifier back into his mouth. I walked to my desk to check the time. 4:54 a.m. I turned around, ready to scold the baby, but his giggle at his hero figures melted my heart, so I merely sighed and turned back. I changed, took a shower, and got everything ready for school. I also changed Deku's diaper and clothes, fed him, and when everything was done, I grabbed him and stomped down the stairs. I entered the obviously empty common room and walked into the kitchen. Still holding Deku with one arm, I made myself breakfast. It was tricky because he kept trying to grab things, and I had to dodge his chubby hands. I sighed as I held my bowl with one hand and Deku with the other, finally sitting down at the table. I took out my phone and placed Deku on the floor to crawl. I started eating while scrolling on my phone, not even noticing when Deku disappeared from my sight. Izuku crawled away from his babysitter and glanced back with a mischievous smile. He held onto the couch and stood up, then wobbly walked into the room he had always wanted to explore, the kitchen. He pushed the door open and looked around. Izuku fell forward back into his crawling position and crawled into the kitchen. He giggled as he spotted a drawer within his reach. Curious about what people told him not to touch, he crawled up to the drawer and stood up to open it. When he did, he pulled it open and smiled at the sight of white plates. He took one out and sat back down. Unfortunately, as he did so, the plate slipped from his hands and crashed onto the floor. Izuku watched with fascination as it shattered into smaller pieces. He had never seen anything like this. The little 2-year-old reached over to the pieces and picked one up. Then a second, and a third. He wondered how many pieces he could fit in his hand and smiled as he managed to fit a fourth one in. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through his hand, and he dropped the pieces, seeing red liquid appear. It hurt and scared him, so he started crying. Bakugo, who had been eating peacefully, suddenly heard the crash in the kitchen and quickly stood up. He walked in and gasped at the sight of Izuku crying on the floor with a hurt hand and broken plate pieces around him. Bakugo carefully approached and lifted him up. He placed him in the sink and rinsed his hand, then applied an all-might bandage to the cut and patted his head. Izuku stopped crying, and Bakugo popped the pacifier back into his mouth. He then turned around and cleaned up the mess on the floor. It took a good 20 minutes to tidy everything up, calm Izuku down, and finish his scolding. After that, he picked the little boy up and took him over to the couch. He considered tying him up but decided against it to avoid trouble. Instead, he sat the baby on the couch and turned on an all-might movie. Immediately, Izuku laughed happily and focused on the screen. Bakugo did a small victory gesture with his arm and sat back down to eat. Eventually, the other students started coming in and getting their food. Izuku didn't notice anyone. The movie was far too interesting. "Hey Bakugo, why is Midoriya all wet and covered in red spots?" Kirishima asked as he walked over. Bakugo glanced at him, then at Izuku, and back at his phone. "He cut himself. I washed him. We need ponytail," he stated calmly. Kirishima nodded and grinned. "Momoyan, come here, we need you," he called out. Yaoyorozu glanced over at the waving boy and smiled, then walked over. "Yes. Bakugo needs you," he said before walking off. Yaoyorozu looked at Bakugo, who exhaled in frustration. "Stupid hair," he muttered. Then he turned to the black-haired girl. "Anyway, Ponytail, can you make some clothes for Deku? The teachers only provided one set for each day. As if they didn't know kids get dirty and need spare clothes." By the end, he was grumbling. Bakugo wasn't used to asking for help, and Yaoyorozu understood that, so she smiled and took it as a request. "Of course." Her arm glowed, and an all-might onesie appeared. "Do you need socks?" she asked politely. Bakugo shook his head. "No, That little guy doesn't let me put socks on. He hates them, Bakugo sighed as Yaoyorozu giggled. Okay then. Here you go, he'll like it. She handed the onesie to Bakugo, who nodded slightly and walked over to the couch where Izuku was. Yaoyorozu understood that as a thank you and smiled as she walked off. Bakugo changed Izuku, who didn't even notice because he was so engrossed in the movie. Bakugo sighed and lifted him up. He whined because the movie wasn't over yet, but Bakugo ignored him and carried him all the way back to his dorm room. When he opened the door with his foot, he gently set the whining Izuku onto his bed and started packing the playmat with toys into a separate bag. He also packed a milk bottle, some food, a pacifier, and Izuku's favorite All Might blanket. After securing Izuku in his blanket, he went to the bathroom to brush his teeth and fix his hair. He then packed his school things and unwrapped the toddler. He placed Izuku on his back as the boy giggled, taking his bag in one hand and Izuku's bag in the other. He opened the door with his foot and headed out, Izuku laughing joyfully. When Bakugo arrived at the classroom, no one was there yet, which was good for him. He set Izuku down, and the boy stood next to him obediently. Bakugo took out the playmat and spread it out next to his desk, arranging the toys on it. He then turned to Izuku, placing the pacifier in his mouth before sitting him on the mat. You play here while I focus on the lesson. Don't do anything that could mess with my grades, Bakugo warned. The baby nodded and smiled happily, starting to play with the toys as Bakugo sighed and sat down in his chair. Soon, the rest of the class began to arrive, and Aizawa, as always, was the last to enter. He glanced at the usually bored Bakugo and then at the always cheerful Izuku on the play mat next to him, before starting the class. Throughout the PRDS, Bakugo focused on learning, and during lunch and recess, he would feed Izuku while scrolling through his phone. When the final bell rang, Izuku was fast asleep on the play mat, hugging an All Might plush. Bakugo smiled slightly when no one was looking and gently placed the sleeping boy onto the floor. He packed everything back into the second bag, swung both bags onto his shoulders, and lifted Izuku in his arms. He carried him back to the dorms, and when he reached his room, he carefully placed Izuku into his cot and covered him with his blanket. Bakugo then decided to do his homework while he had a spare hour. After setting up the mat and toys and washing the empty food containers, he sat down at his desk, took out his homework, and began working. About an hour later, after finishing his assignments and scrolling through his phone, he suddenly heard strange sounds coming from Izuku's cot. He turned around and gasped as he saw the 2-year-old on the play mat, smiling proudly at him. Bakugo walked up to him, shaking his head. "How did you get out of the cot?" he asked, staring at Izuku, who giggled and clapped his hands. "I did it. I did it," he laughed. Bakugo started to scold him. "What if you fell? What if you hurt yourself?" he asked, and Izuku looked at him with confusion. "I mean like your bones," Bakugo explained, and Izuku nodded in understanding, lowering his head. "I'm sorry," he mumbled. Bakugo sighed. "You're lucky you're so cute. Otherwise, I would have been really mad," he laughed. However, Izuku took those words to heart and started to cry. Bakugo's eyes widened. "Oh no, I didn't mean that. I would never actually be mad at you. I was just joking," he rambled, patting the toddler on the head. Izuku stopped crying and smiled. "Okay. I didn't believe you anyway," he laughed. Bakugo felt annoyed. "Come back here," he yelled as Izuku jumped up and started running around the room. He was surprisingly good at running for a 2-year-old. Eventually, Bakugo caught him, and they rolled around on the ground, laughing. Suddenly, Izuku froze and scrunched his face up. Bakugo quickly understood what was happening and brought the boy into a tight hug. "Breathe, Deku. Calm down. I know it hurts, just breathe. It will be over soon," he whispered as Izuku started to cry and shake. Tears streamed down his face as he wailed loudly. Bakugo hugged him tightly, whispering reassuring words into his ear. Eventually, everything calmed down, and Izuku slumped onto the ground, exhausted. "It hurts, Kachin," he whimpered. Bakugo realized that Izuku was now 3, so he would already have the nickname for him. He sighed and hugged him closer. "I know it hurts, Deku. Shoo, it's going to be over soon." They lay there for another 10 minutes until Bakugo noticed that Izuku had fallen asleep. He lifted him gently, dressed him in 3-year-old clothes, and put the ripped ones in the bin before lowering him back into his cot. After changing into normal clothes, he headed down to the common room. It was still 7:47 p.m., so he had time to watch a movie. When he arrived, he and the Baku squad settled around the couches and chose a horror movie to watch. People began joining them throughout the film. They spent a good hour watching, unaware of the mistake Bakugo had just made. About an hour into the movie, Bakugo decided to check on Deku. "Oi, I'm checking up on the nerd," he yelled to his friend, who grinned and nodded at him before turning back to talk to others. Bakugo walked to the elevator and pressed the button. When the doors opened, he stepped out, suddenly feeling uneasy. What was this gut feeling? He walked over to his room and froze as he saw his door hanging open. He was sure he had closed it when he left. He gulped and slowly walked in, immediately noticing the chair next to his door. What was going on? He cautiously approached the cot and looked over, hoping that his fears were unfounded. But of course they were not. Deku had escaped. His eyes widened, and he dashed out of his room, racing down to the common room at lightning speed. He knows how to climb out of the cot now. There was a chair next to the door, and the door was opened. That was definitely Deku. He climbed into the chair and escaped. Ugh, I'm such an idiot. Why didn't I lock the door? My mind was racing, so I dashed down the stairs instead of taking the elevator and swung the doors open. Everyone's attention turned to me, and I saw the worry in their eyes. I was sure I looked just as distressed. Deku has escaped. I forgot to lock the door, and he climbed out of his cot. We have to find him, I shouted, feeling warm tears start to roll down my cheeks. Am I crying? Kirishima approached me slowly and pulled me into a comforting hug. I didn't resist and let him hold me. Calm down, Baku bro. We'll find him. At least we know it's just him escaping and not someone trying to take him, right? He said, and I mumbled a yes. He was right. A kidnapping would be much worse. Okay, everyone, please remain calm and take a seat. Ida, go inform the teachers, Ponytail announced, handing an earpiece she had just made to Four Eyes. He caught it, saluted, and hurried off to the teacher's lounge. Yairozu Momo sat everyone down on the couches and began brainstorming a plan while Kirishima continued to hug me, trying to calm my nerves. Bakugo, can you tell us about Midoriya's behavior and how old he is now? Momo asked, and everyone turned to me. I shook Kirishima's arms off in embarrassment and focused on my hands, trying hard not to let my frustration explode. Deku is 3 years old right now. He's very curious and always wants to know more, which annoys me because he gets into dangerous situations just to find out what things are like. He could be anywhere. He can walk and run pretty confidently now, and he can reach a lot more things. I clenched my fists. It's 9:27 p.m. and it's dark outside, so it'll be tough to find him. The idiot isn't afraid of the dark, so he won't hesitate to go outside or away from the light. Ugh. I groaned and buried my face in my hands. The class understood why I was so on edge and didn't press me further. Momo nodded. Thank you. I think I know what to do. Jiro, can you scan the area? Momo instructed. Jiro nodded and plugged her earplugs into the ground. After a moment of listening, she sighed and stood up again. No use. There are too many vibrations. I can't tell which one is him. Momo nodded. All right, let's split into 3 groups. One group will search inside the building in case Midoriya didn't leave, one will search outside, and a smaller group will go around the other dorm buildings to ask if anyone has seen him. Don't spread the word that he's a baby, only we know that, and Class 1B knows too. Let's split up and search. Please remain calm. She glanced at me, noticing I was taking deep breaths to calm down. Bakugo? Which group? Outside, I stated firmly and stood up. Okay, Baku squad and the rest of the Deku squad will search outside too. Everyone else, split into 2 groups, one with 4 people and the other with the rest, Momo commanded, and everyone quickly dispersed. She then made everyone an earpiece to communicate and handed them out. Let's go, she declared, and everyone rushed off to search for our missing friend. Ida burst into the teacher's lounge, startling all the teachers. After all, It was nearly 10 p.m. He took a moment to catch his breath, then exclaimed, "Midoriya has escaped. He is lost. Please help us search." He bowed deeply. The teachers gasped, and Izawa, who had been resting under his desk, quickly crawled out and stood up. "When did you notice he was gone?" Izawa asked seriously. "Bakugo informed us 10 minutes ago. The class has come up with a plan and split into 3 groups for the search. We need more people to help search outside," Ida announced, waving his arms in concern. Izawa nodded as all the teachers put aside what they were doing and stood up. "Explain the plan," he instructed. Ida did just that. The teachers accepted the plan and joined the outside team. Izawa decided to check on Eri, so he hurried to her room. Meanwhile, let me tell you what was happening with Izuku. Izuku sat up in his cot after Bakugo left. He didn't want to sleep. He sighed and looked around, then decided to get out of his cot. He climbed out and landed on a pile of plushies. Izuku giggled and stood up, walking toward the door. He reached for the handle but found he was just a bit too short. Izuku whined in annoyance. Then an idea popped into his mind. He walked over to Bakugo's desk chair, dragged it to the door, climbed onto it, and stood up. With a little effort, he managed to lower the handle, and the door squeaked open. He clapped his hands and laughed at his success. "I did it! I did it!" Then Izuku jumped down and walked out of the room, smiling proudly. He walked over to the large hallway window and gazed outside. He gasped in awe at the UA landscape stretching far beyond his vision. Then something pink caught his eye. Izuku turned his head and spotted a small building with a large window, where a pink light shone through. He stuck his thumb in his mouth as he turned around and walked down the corridor. "I need to find out what that light is," he decided, and walked down the stairs, determined. The little boy opened the doors and stepped out onto the cold night floor with his bare feet. He shivered but ignored the feeling, as the mysterious light was far more important. Izuku shuffled around the large dorm building, searching for the smaller, mysterious building. He finally spotted it and started walking toward it. The pink light was still there. Soon, the boy arrived at the front door of the house and knocked. Some shuffling was heard, and a girl with gray hair opened the door. She looked down at Izuku and tilted her head to the side. "Who are you?" she asked. Izuku smiled. "I'm Izuku Midoriya," he said proudly, extending his hand for a shake. "I'm Eri," she replied, shaking his hand. She looked at Izuku for a moment, then something clicked in her mind. "Wait, Deku." Izuku nodded. She stared at him, confused. "Why are you so small?" she questioned. Now both of them stared at each other, puzzled. "Because I'm 3, Izuku said, unsure why she looked confused. Eri shook her head slightly, thinking he must be his little brother, as their parents had given them the same name. "I'm 6, she stated, then looked at Izuku again and asked, "Why did you come here?" "I came here because I was wondering what the pink light in your window was," Izuku replied. Eri smiled. "Oh, that's my magical glowing fairy wand. Want to see?" Eri asked. Izuku nodded eagerly. She smiled and let him in. "Here, look, if you press this button, the star glows pink." She demonstrated her magic wand, and Izuku clapped his hands happily. "So cool! So cool!" he exclaimed, jumping around. Eri grinned proudly. "Hey, wanna play hide and seek?" "That's my favorite game," Eri suggested. Izuku nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, that's my favorite game too," he exclaimed. "Okay, I'll count first." Eri laughed and closed her eyes. 1.2.3.4.5.6.7.8.9.10. Ready or not, here I come. She smiled and opened her eyes. Suddenly, the door opened and Aizawa walked in. He glanced at Eri, who looked back at him, confused. "Eri, have you found Izuku?" Aizawa asked, slightly out of breath. Eri, thinking Aizawa was also playing hide and seek, shook her head. "Nope, not yet." Aizawa sighed and hurried out of the house again, closing the door behind him. Eri heard giggling from under her bed and tiptoed over. "Found you!" she shouted, bending over to look under the bed where Izuku was hiding. He laughed and crawled out. "My turn," he giggled. Meanwhile, The class was in full panic mode. They had been searching for the missing boy for an hour now and still had no clue where he was. Bakugo was not handling it well. Kirishima struggled to calm him down and prevent him from hitting his head on the wall. Everyone was stressed and not in a good state. The teachers were equally frazzled, if not worse. Aizawa hadn't made a single comment or taken a nap during the entire ordeal. Mike was silent, Midnight hadn't made any jokes, and All Might looked like he might faint at any moment. Everyone, I understand we are all stressed out, but we shouldn't let that cloud our thinking, Ida said, worried sick himself but trying to maintain a calm demeanor as class representative. Momo nodded. Yes. I just realized how big of a mistake we made while searching, she stated, drawing everyone's attention. Well duh. We let the kid escape. That's a big mistake. Bakugo yelled. Everyone ignored his outburst. They understood he was just very worried and frustrated. Momo sighed. I've realized that we need to think differently, she said, standing up. This whole time, we've been thinking, where would a 3-year-old go? But we should be thinking about what would interest someone like Midoriya. He must have a reason for wandering off. She pointed at Bakugo. And you, Bakugo, are crucial for those thoughts. So calm down and start brainstorming. Being angry won't help. She raised her voice as everyone stared in shock. Bakugo stopped his frustrated actions and turned to her, eyes wide as if she had just revealed the answer to a difficult question. He blinked and walked up to her slowly, fists clenched. When he reached her, he stood there for a moment before looking up. I agree, Bakugo mumbled, and everyone sighed in relief. Momo smiled. Okay, what would a 3-year-old like Midoriya most likely be interested in at 10:30 p.m.? She asked. Bakugo froze. Wait, it's dark, and he doesn't have night vision. So, something glowing in the dark, or something that stands out without a light source, he said. Aizawa stiffened. Yes, that could be true. Momo murmured, resting her chin on her hand. Uraraka jumped forward. Also, when kids are bored, they want someone to play with, she exclaimed, and everyone looked at her, then back at Momo. Yes, and we've asked everyone from other classes and grades, and they haven't seen anything. I don't see any reason why they would lie, so that must be true, she said. So what place could capture Midoriya's attention at night that also has someone to play with? Todoroki finished, and everyone gasped as they realized. Eri! Aizawa jumped up. I misspoke earlier. They must have been playing a game of hide and seek. Eri has a new magic wand that glows pink. She always plays with it at night because it shines brighter in the dark, he exclaimed as everyone started running out of the building toward Eri's house. Yeah. And when we were little, Deku's favorite game was hide and seek. Bakugo yelled. When they burst into the house, they paused at the sight before them. Eri and Izuku were cuddled up together, softly snoring on Eri's bed under a blanket. All Might fainted, Bakugo fell to the floor in relief, Aizawa rushed to the kids to check their pulse and breathing, Momo and Uraraka hugged, soon joined by all the girls. Kirishima started crying with Denki, Mineta snapped a picture, Ida pushed up his glasses and wiped his tears, Midnight struggled to stand while holding the fainted All Might, and the rest collapsed onto the floor with a large sigh of relief. They had finally found Izuku, safe and sound. In the morning, Bakugo woke up with Izuku sleeping in his arms. He remembered the events of the previous night and hugged the toddler tightly. No one had disturbed the two kids. Bakugo had simply taken him to his room and fallen asleep with him. Eri was tucked into her bed, and everyone had left. Bakugo felt relieved that they found the missing toddler. He slowly climbed out of bed, careful not to wake the sleeping boy. After brushing his hair and getting ready, he gently woke Izuku. They both walked downstairs to the common room for breakfast. When they arrived, Bakugo was immediately greeted by Ida. Good morning, Bakugo. Good morning, 3-year-old Midoriya. Aizawa announced that there would be no school today because Eri wasn't feeling well. He mentioned that classes would be rescheduled for another day. With that, he hurried off. Izuku flinched at the sudden announcement but relaxed when Ida zoomed away. He's a bit scary, Izuku commented. Bakugo snorted in agreement. I know, right? The two made their way to the common room, where Izuku sat down at a table. Bakugo headed to the kitchen and returned with 2 bowls of cereal. Here, cereal isn't the healthiest, but who cares? Bakugo grumbled, handing the smaller bowl to Izuku. Thanks, Izuku replied, starting to eat. Bakugo joined him, digging into his own bowl. Once they finished, they went back to Bakugo's room to brush their teeth. Hey, Deku, Bakugo said, sitting on his bed while watching Izuku play with his toys. Izuku looked up and smiled. Yeah. Bakugo sighed. Do you want to go somewhere? Like, I don't know. A playground or something? He asked awkwardly. Izuku's eyes lit up, and he nodded eagerly. Bakugo nodded back and took out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts until he found Kirishima and called him. Hello? Baku bro. Kirishima's voice came through the phone. Izuku jumped up and grabbed the phone from Bakugo's hand. Hey, give that back. Bakugo yelled. Izuku giggled. Hi Kiri. Kachin wants to he exclaimed before Bakugo snatched the phone back. Kirishima waited patiently as the commotion settled down. Finally, Izuku was pouting on the floor with his arms crossed, while Bakugo sighed and sat back on his bed. Ahem. Anyway, what I was going to say is, do you want to come with us to the playground? I need help with this idiot, Bakugo said. Kirishima laughed. Sure, let me ask the others. After a bit, Kirishima returned to the phone. I asked them, and only Denki said he'll come. The others are busy. Bakugo sighed. Great. I needed a girl. They usually have better control over little kids, he grumbled. Kirishima chuckled. Just ask the Deku squad. Uraraka is always free. Bakugo sighed again. Fine. Meet us in the common room in 20 minutes. He hung up and searched for Uraraka's number, pressing it reluctantly. Hello. Uraraka answered after some noise. Bakugo raised an eyebrow but shrugged it off. Hey, do you and some others from the group want to join me and the kid on a trip to the playground? He asked. Uraraka giggled. That's a lot of swear words in one sentence, Bakugo. Bakugo's face flushed with irritation. Oh, just be quiet, he shouted. Uraraka laughed. Yes, Todoroki and I are free today. We can come. Bakugo grumbled more, then said, Meet us in the common room. He hung up. Bakugo got up from his bed and grabbed Izuku's bag, stuffing in 2 drink bottles and placing a hat on Izuku's head. He put on a cap himself and applied sunscreen to both of them. Izuku giggled at the touch, which made Bakugo smile for a moment before he turned serious again. Eventually, they were ready. As they walked down, they saw everyone was already there. Uraraka bounced over to Izuku, who shuffled back a little. Hey cutie! We're going to the park today, she exclaimed, lifting him away from Bakugo, whose face flushed again in annoyance. Izuku giggled as Uraraka made him float, while Todoroki tied a rope around his waist, making him feel like a balloon. Yay! Izuku laughed. The 5 teenagers made their way out of the building and to the playground. Uraraka and Todoroki played with Izuku for 3 hours, with Todoroki creating ice slides and fireworks, while Uraraka floated him around. Izuku was having the time of his life. Meanwhile, Bakugo, Kirishima, and Kaminari enjoyed some time together, finally taking a break from babysitting duties. They chatted loudly, tackled each other, and had fun. Eventually, Bakugo decided it was time to go. Just as he was about to call everyone back, he noticed the rope tied to Izuku had come undone. No one else seemed to notice until Izuku began to float higher and higher. He giggled, thinking it was part of the fun, but when he realized how high he was going, he started to cry. Bakugo jumped up, shouting, Uraraka! The kid! He yelled as Uraraka looked up, gasping when she saw Izuku floating above the trees. She quickly glanced around and saw Bakugo ready to catch him, so she shouted, Release, and Izuku began to drop. Bakugo leaped up and caught him just in time, while Todoroki created an ice slide to bring them back down safely. Izuku smiled when they reached the ground and hugged Bakugo tightly. Bakugo yelled at Uraraka and Todoroki, who he blamed for not securing the rope properly. When Kirishima finally approached and calmed him down, the group made their way back to UA. Once they arrived, they all had lunch before heading to their rooms. Bakugo laid Izuku down in his cot for a nap, and the little boy, exhausted from the day's fun, fell asleep immediately. Bakugo sighed and returned to the common room, where he found Kirishima sitting on a couch, engrossed in his phone. Bakugo walked over. "Hey, move over," he said, standing next to him. Kirishima looked up and grinned, knowing Bakugo actually meant, "Can I sit here?" He shuffled over. Bakugo sat down and sighed. "What's wrong?" Kirishima asked with a smile, nudging Bakugo. Bakugo growled but sighed again. "Nothing. Just tired," he admitted. Kirishima nodded. "Yeah, it's hot today." "You know what?" Kirishima suddenly said, putting his phone down and looking at Bakugo with bright eyes. Bakugo raised an eyebrow. "We should go to the beach with the class sometime. It'll be fun. Midoriya would love it too. I remember you saying he enjoyed the beach when he was little." Kirishima smirked. Bakugo's eyes widened as he quickly covered Kirishima's mouth. "Shut up, you idiot," he growled, then lowered his hand. Kirishima laughed. "Okay. So, what do you think of the idea?" Kirishima asked again. Bakugo shrugged. "I guess it's fine," he mumbled. Kirishima smiled. "I think it's great. We should plan it for some time this week." He trailed off, thinking. After a moment, he shrugged and went back to scrolling on his phone. Bakugo sighed and glanced at Kirishima's screen. When he saw what he was looking at, he snorted. Kirishima blushed and quickly hid his phone. "Seriously?" Bakugo laughed. Kirishima turned even redder. "What's? You should just confess. Everyone can see how close you two are," Bakugo smirked. Kirishima's face turned even redder as he covered it with his hands. "No. Denki never said anything about that," he protested, shaking his head. Bakugo sighed. "Come on, you idiot." He then noticed Kaminari in the kitchen and smirked. "Hey, come here," he called out. Denki flinched but walked over. "Yeah?" he asked, raising an eyebrow at the blushing Kirishima, who was mumbling something unintelligible and hadn't yet realized Denki was called over. Bakugo tapped Kirishima on the shoulder, prompting him to lift his head. "What?" he asked, still oblivious to Denki's presence. Bakugo sighed and pointed at Denki. Kirishima glanced over, and his face turned an even deeper shade of red, nearly matching his hair color. Denki also began to blush when their eyes met, and Bakugo just smirked. "See? Now confess, you idiots," he said before walking off, leaving the two staring and blushing at each other. Bakugo made his way to his room, quietly opening the door and stepping inside. He sighed when he saw Izuku already on his playmat, playing with his toys. Bakugo closed the door and sat down at his desk, deciding to do some work before bedtime. Izuku looked up and smiled, climbing up to Bakugo's neck. After 30 minutes of Bakugo doing his homework while Izuku climbed around like a little monkey, Bakugo finally gave in and stood up, shaking the energetic 3-year-old off his back. "What's wrong with you?" he grumbled. Izuku giggled and clung to Bakugo's leg. "Play with me. Please," he whined. Bakugo was about to yell a "no" at the kid but remembered a night when he had escaped to find someone to play with. Reluctantly, he nodded. "Come, I'll show you my favorite toys. You'll be the villain and I'll be All Might." Izuku exclaimed happily, running over to his toys. Bakugo sighed and sat down next to him. Izuku looked around and handed Bakugo a Mineta doll. "That will be the villain," he explained, and Bakugo had to suppress a laugh. Izuku then grabbed an All Might figure and jumped up. "Never fear, citizens. Help has arrived. Because I am here," he shouted, his voice so loud that Bakugo feared for his eardrums. Whoa, shoo, quieter," Bakugo scolded. Izuku completely ignored him. Give up, villain. You have no chance. Because I am here," he yelled. Bakugo winced but made the villain fly up. "Mwah! You think you can beat me, you foolish hero? I'm the best of the villains." "It's you who has no chance," he said, clashing his Mineta toy with Izuku's All Might one. "Ha! I'm stronger, you heartless villain." Izuku laughed, finally tossing the villain onto the ground. "Oh no!" Bakugo exclaimed. Izuku laughed and jumped around. I won. Everything is fine now because I was here," he shouted, running away with the All Might figure. He then returned and jumped onto Bakugo, laughing. Again. Again. Bakugo smiled. Suddenly, their laughter was interrupted by a loud cry from Izuku. Bakugo frowned as he glanced at the clock, which read 7. It was the usual time for growth spurts. Bakugo sat up and hugged the now crying boy as Izuku wailed, growing into a 4-year-old. Bakugo did his best to comfort him. Eventually, after some time, Izuku stopped crying, and only quiet sobs were heard. Bakugo knew the boy wouldn't remember anything from before his growth, so he hugged him tighter. Eventually he felt Izuku calm down, his heartbeat returning to normal. His breathing slowed, and the boy fell asleep as he always did after growing. Bakugo sighed and placed the now 4-year-old into his cot, looking at the sleeping child with a sad smile. If only you knew, Izuku, he thought. Bakugo lay down on his bed, wiping away a tear that escaped his eye. Slowly his eyelids grew heavy, and he fell asleep. On the following Thursday morning, Bakugo woke up and slowly sat up, adjusting to the light. He slammed his hand onto the alarm clock to shut it off. Suddenly he heard a small voice. "Good morning, Kachin. How did you sleep?" Bakugo turned his head to see the 4-year-old boy smiling at him, an All Might figure in his arms. Bakugo yawned. "Fine," he replied. "Get ready for school. Unfortunately for us, Eri doesn't get sick all the time, so today we have school." Bakugo grumbled. Izuku tilted his head in confusion. "Who's Eri?" he asked. Bakugo yawned again. "Never mind." The two boys got ready for school and went down to the common room for breakfast. They quickly ate and then returned to their room to brush their teeth. After grabbing their things, they left, walking together to the classroom. When they opened the door, they were the first ones there. Bakugo helped Izuku set up his things next to his desk. They spread out his playmat, took out his pillows and toys, and arranged his picture books. Izuku was already 4, so he knew how to read. When everything was ready, Bakugo set up his own things as other students began to arrive. Izuku smiled at them, not knowing who they were but happy to meet them. Aizawa entered and started class soon after. During the last PRD, Aizawa walked in and began class as usual. "Okay kids, today you are Hiwas." Interrupted when the door burst open and a muscular figure zoomed inside. "Never fear, students. Because I am here." All Might yelled, sliding into the classroom. Aizawa shook his head, remarking that it was the 5th time this term that All Might had broken the door, but no one paid attention. Everyone giggled as they looked over at Izuku, who appeared ready to burst with excitement. His mouth was wide open, and his eyes were as big as saucers. He was frozen, staring at the grinning hero in front of him. Suddenly he jumped up and ran over to All Might. "Oh my gosh, All Might, is it really you? I love you so much. Please give me an autograph." Izuku exclaimed, jumping around and speaking a mile a minute. All Might smiled, managing to pick up the small boy. "Young Midoriya, I can see you admire me a lot," he grinned. Izuku gasped. "You know my name?" he exclaimed, causing the class to giggle again. All Might nodded. "Yes, I do." "Now, kid, don't react to what you're about to see," he warned, and Izuku nodded, saluting. The hero set Izuku back on the floor and transformed into his leaner form. Laughter erupted as Izuku's mouth dropped open and his eyes widened even further. What? Huh? All Might smiled. "This, young Midoriya, is my true form." Izuku jumped up. "So cool," he exclaimed. After everyone worked together to calm Izuku down, Aizawa finally announced what they would do for the practice lesson. The class changed into their hero costumes, and Izuku was led to the sidelines to watch with All Might and Aizawa. When the final bell rang, the class collapsed onto the couches, chairs, or floor in their common room, utterly exhausted from the intense training. The doors swung open, and a smiling Izuku rushed in. "You were amazing. I was watching with All Might. I saw everything. You were so incredible." Everyone laughed and Momo stood up. "Guys, Class 1B invited us for a hangout in their common room today. Who's coming?" Everyone raised their hands, nodding and smiling, indicating they were free. Momo beamed. We'll meet there in 30 minutes. Everyone, come when you're ready. With that, everyone nodded and made their way to their rooms, while Bakugo dragged Izuku along with him. Eventually, the entire Class 1A stood at the entrance of 1B's dorm building. Momo knocked loudly, and soon the door was opened by Tetsu. "Yo, Class 1A has arrived," he shouted back to his class, who turned around, smiled, and waved. Class 1A waved back and walked in. Suddenly, they heard a familiar voice. "Oh, if it isn't Class 1A." Everyone silently groaned and turned to face Monoma, who was sauntering toward them with a smirk. He glanced over the class and laughed. "Wow, you guys look ridiculous. Coming here because your dorm caught fire due to your angry Pomeranian? Why am I not surprised?" He smirked at Bakugo, who looked ready to explode. Kendo moved toward the annoying blonde, but a small hand stopped her. "Stop," Izuku said firmly, lowering his hand. Kendo hesitated but complied. Monoma smirked again. "Ah, who's that? The class's famous Izuku Midoriya? Huh, look how powerful you are now," he laughed. Izuku smiled and began walking toward Monoma. The laughter faded, and Monoma froze, sensing the change in atmosphere. "Hi," Izuku said calmly, still smiling as he stopped in front of Monoma and looked up. "I'm Izuku Midoriya." Monoma gulped, about to respond, but Izuku interrupted him. "No need to introduce yourself. I can already tell that your name is not very nice." Bakugo snorted as everyone stared in shock. A young boy had just spoken up. Izuku continued smiling. "Well, Mr. Not Very Nice, I don't want to be rude, but please, these are my friends, so don't talk like that about them. I don't know who you are exactly, not that I want to know, but I can already tell you deserve this." He finished with a smile and raised his hand, delivering a light punch to the stunned Monoma's stomach. Monoma gasped and fell to the ground. Izuku looked down at him, frowning. "Do not do that ever again," he said before turning on his heel. He looked at the astonished class and smiled. "Okay, can we continue now?" Everyone erupted into applause, and Bakugo ran up, smirking down at the boy. "That's the way, kid," he praised. Izuku beamed. Kendo then approached Monoma and began dragging him away. "Monoma, today was your worst failure. You got completely wrecked by a 4-year-old, she sighed, shaking her head. Laughter filled the air as everyone thanked her while she pulled the blonde away. When she returned, the party began. Everyone laughed and danced for hours, eating, drinking, non-alcoholic beverages, singing and having fun. Izuku bounced around, giggling and enjoying himself immensely. That night, both classes, except for Monoma, partied, watched movies, ate, sang, and played games. At 7:14, Bakugo decided it was time for him and Izuku to head back, knowing that Izuku would need rest soon. After a challenging 10 minutes of coaxing Izuku away from the festivities and into his room, he sat him down on his bed. They both lay down together, and Bakugo hugged the boy tightly as they drifted off to sleep. Izuku skipped down the hallway happily, dragging the half-asleep and grumpy Bakugo behind him. "We're going to the beach! We're going to the beach! Yay!" he sang, pulling Bakugo to the elevator and out when they arrived at the common room. Izuku's eyes sparkled as he saw the whole class ready, dressed in swimsuits and prepared for fun. Kirishima noticed them first and waved. "Hey, Mini Mido bro." "Hey, Baku bro," he grinned. Izuku laughed and jumped up, fist in the air. "Yeah, we're going to the beach," he shouted. Bakugo grumbled. "Shut up, idiot. Shitty hair, why did class cancel again? Did Eri get sick again?" he asked. Kirishima nodded. "Yeah. But not only that, Aizawa said some kind of workers are coming to our classroom to renovate stuff." He shrugged. "Didn't bother remembering their name." Bakugo sighed. "You mean builders?" But Kirishima was already chatting with Denki, who had just arrived. Bakugo raised an eyebrow. "Oi," he said, catching the attention of the two. "Did something happen?" he asked, twirling his finger between them. Both blushed furiously and shook their heads. "No. Not what you think," they exclaimed. Bakugo sighed. "I meant, are you two finally official?" he clarified. Both nodded and smiled. "Yeah," they said in unison, and Denki leaned in to kiss Kirishima's cheek. Izuku, who had been silently observing, closed his eyes. Disgusting, he whined. The teens laughed, but soon their attention shifted to Momo, who clapped her hands. Guys, let's head out, everyone's here, she announced. Yeah. The whole class arrived at the beach, gasping at the stunning landscape. But Izuku was focused on one thing, having fun. Kachin. I'll race you to the water, he yelled, dropping his things on the sand and sprinting toward the waves. Bakugo grumbled something, tossed his belongings onto Kirishima, and dashed after the kid. Kirishima protested as he stumbled under the sudden weight, while Kaminari hurried to help him up. Everyone else set up their things next to Bakugo's and Izuku's. Momo and some other girls arranged a picnic. Some people sat around, playing games, chatting and laughing, while others lounged in the sun, soaking up the warmth. Since it was a weekday, the beach was mostly empty, allowing the class to enjoy the space to the fullest. Some students splashed in the cool water. Izuku laughed as he swam behind Bakugo and playfully splashed him. Bakugo, annoyed by the cold, turned around and lunged at Izuku, tackling him into the water. Izuku squealed and flailed about, while others joined in the fun, splashing each other. Some enjoyed floating peacefully, only to be playfully dunked by their friends. Everyone had a fantastic time, and after 2 hours, they gathered around the picnic to enjoy the food that had been prepared. They then held a competition for the best sandcastle, which Koda won. Everyone agreed on his creation, and after Izuku playfully protested for a while, Koda received a second ice block as a prize. Afterward, the boys ventured into the nearby forest to collect sticks and branches, which they brought back to the picnic area to build a campfire. Todoroki ignited it, and everyone enjoyed roasting marshmallows. Izuku dozed off halfway through, resting on Bakugo, who surprisingly managed not to wake him. Everyone had a great time at the beach and returned to the dorms around 5 p.m., just as it was starting to get dark. Once back, they had dinner and looked through the photos Jiro had taken during their beach day. Laughter erupted as they saw the picture of an irate Bakugo splashing a startled Izuku, and they scowled at the shot of Mineta, who had been thrown far away while caught in a compromising situation. They smiled at the photo of Koda proudly grinning next to his sandcastle and grinned at the images of everyone enjoying the picnic and roasting marshmallows. Eventually, it became 7:20 p.m., and Bakugo took Izuku up to their room. Today marked Izuku's 6th birthday, and Bakugo noticed that the growth seemed to cause him more discomfort each night. After changing into their pajamas, they both brushed their teeth and got ready for bed. Izuku smiled as they crawled into Bakugo's bed, blissfully unaware of what was about to happen. Suddenly, Izuku scrunched up his face, his eyes widening before closing tightly. Tears streamed down his cheeks as Bakugo exhaled and hugged him tightly. Izuku clenched his fists and returned the hug, crying from the intense discomfort. His arms and legs grew, along with the rest of him, until Bakugo was holding a 6-year-old Izuku. Exhausted from crying, Izuku eventually fell asleep, and Bakugo looked down at him with a sad smile, humming a soothing melody. It pained Bakugo to see Izuku in distress every night, and it hurt to know that he didn't remember their previous days together. He understood that this was just part of the quirk, but he still felt a deep ache from witnessing it. Bakugo, however, couldn't quite grasp why he felt this way. He often told himself that he disliked the green-haired boy, and while it seemed true, was there really a warm light inside him that felt the opposite? Was that light now emerging? Bakugo closed his eyes and sighed as the realization struck him the truth he had tried so hard to conceal from himself and everyone around him for so long. The truth that was now undeniable. Minute. I'm in love with him. I will be taking Midoriya today. We will return no later than 5 p.m., so be ready to receive him back then. Izawa. My eyes sparkled with excitement as I jumped up. A day with a pro hero. I whispered excitedly, careful not to wake Kachin. Eraserhead sighed. Call me Aizawa-sensei or Aizawa-kid, he grumbled. I smiled, overwhelmed with joy. Sir, yes sir. I saluted. Aizawa signed the paper, and we walked out, locking the door behind us. Izuku skipped along the corridor with Aizawa trailing behind. They exited the school and entered Aizawa's car. "Where are we going, Mr. Aizawa?" Izuku asked, hoping the name was acceptable. "Police office. I need my help to catch some villains." "You'll be in the kids' room," Aizawa replied, still not starting the car. Izuku raised an eyebrow. "What are we waiting for?" "Eri," Aizawa said simply. Even though Izuku didn't understand who or what that was, he sat quietly. Soon enough, the school doors opened, and a girl with white hair ran out, heading toward the car. She opened the back door and sat down, panting. Sorry, Aizawa." She began but was interrupted by Aizawa. "Don't worry. Buckle up, kids," he said, driving off. Only then did Eri notice the boy next to her, staring. She stared back and noticed some similarities between her Deku and this boy. "Hey, your name's Eri, I see?" the boy asked. Eri smiled. "What about your name?" she asked. "I'm Izuku Midoriya," he grinned. Eri stared at him, dumbfounded. "What?" he asked, confused. Eri blinked. "Oh, why are you older now but not so old?" she asked. Izuku tilted his head in confusion as Aizawa cracked a smile, enjoying the confused expressions of the two 6-year-olds. "What do you mean?" "I'm 6, he said. Eri nodded, realizing he must be another Izuku. "Okay, sorry, I mistook you for someone else," she said, looking down as Aizawa tried his best not to laugh. Izuku smiled. "Don't worry about it." When the three arrived at the police office, the kids were placed in the play area while Aizawa went to a conference room. For an hour, the two 6-year-olds played, but they quickly grew bored. "Hey, Eri, what if we go exploring?" Izuku suggested, turning to face her. Eri looked at him with wide eyes. "No. We'll get in trouble. It could also be dangerous," she protested. Izuku smiled. "I'll protect you. I want to be a hero when I grow up, so I'll keep you safe. It'll be fun. We can just walk around for a bit to find Aizawa and tell him we're bored," he pleaded. Eri sighed. "Fine." The two kids helped each other climb out of the playroom and sneak past the sleeping guards. "Phew. They didn't notice," Izuku whispered. Eri nodded. Suddenly, as they turned a corner, two large figures appeared behind them. Izuku turned around and saw two police officers smirking down at them. Instantly, he sensed something was off. These were not the friendly officers they seemed to be. He stepped in front of Eri, and they both backed away until they hit the wall. It was a dead end. Eri squeaked as the two figures laughed, closing in on them. Izuku took a fighting stance, his confident demeanor masking his inner nervousness. "Don't worry, Eri. I've got this," he said. The two figures laughed again. "Did you hear that?" one sneered. "Tell that to your mommy, kid," the other replied. Izuku shook his head. They didn't even sound intimidating. He looked up at them and smiled, causing the two to pause. "What are you smiling at?" one sneered. Izuku stepped toward them and ducked as one swung a punch. "I can't hit them, they haven't hurt us yet, which means the law would be on their side if I did. Plus, I can't take them both on. We just have to run," Izuku thought. The villains exchanged glances, surprised that a 6-year-old could be so calm and confident. Seizing the moment, Izuku reached behind him, grabbed Eri's hand, and jumped forward, sliding between the villains' legs. The two kids quickly got up and ran away. The villains roared with rage and turned to chase them, but they were halted by a scarf wrapping around them. I am here? Nope, all might." "I'm never saying that phrase," a gruff voice said, and the kids stopped running. "Aizawa!" they both exclaimed, turning around. Aizawa had subdued the villains and laid them down on the floor. He turned to the kids and nodded. "Yes, that's my name." "What?" he said, though a slight smile crept onto his face. He was glad he made it in time. The kids ran up to him and hugged him. Aizawa hugged back. "Well done, you two. I saw everything from my office. I came here as soon as I could. Midoriya, well done," he praised. Izuku smiled and held Eri's hand. "Eri was also very brave," he said. Eri blushed and smiled too. "But Izuku did all the work. He helped us escape," she laughed. Aizawa smiled and left the police to handle the situation. He wore a serious expression as he and the kids walked back to his car. He understood that Izuku didn't fight because he recognized the law, but he couldn't believe a 6-year-old could be so clever. He sighed. Problem child. The three made their way back to UA, and Aizawa locked them inside the teacher's lounge. Izuku fangirled over the pros and only calmed down when they each gave him their autograph. Aizawa climbed into his sleeping bag and drifted off, leaving the kids to play on the couch. Once again bored, Izuku came up with a brilliant idea. He whispered something to Eri, and once she nodded, she stood up and walked to a drawer in Aizawa's desk. She took out some bows, a brush, hair ties, and other accessories, then returned to Izuku and showed them to him. Izuku smiled and nodded in appreciation. The teachers watched with curiosity as the two kids approached Aizawa and carefully unzipped his sleeping bag so that only his head was exposed. They did it gently, trying not to wake the pro hero. Eri began brushing his hair, and the teachers giggled, understanding what was about to happen. Izuku watched as Eri braided the pro's hair. When she finished, he stepped forward to add bows and ribbons to the black strands. After 30 minutes of their hard work, Aizawa's hair was beautifully styled into 2 braids, adorned with large pink bows at the ends, glitter sprinkled throughout, and ribbons enhancing the look. The kids admired their creation once they put everything away, smiling proudly. The teachers chuckled as Aizawa woke up, oblivious to his new hairstyle. He yawned and checked the clock, grumbling something before getting out of his sleeping bag. The kids giggled and hugged each other. It's time to go back. Classes have finished, so let's hand you back to Bakugo, problem child. Eri, return to your room, Aizawa said. Eri waved goodbye to Izuku as she walked away, and he waved back while he and Aizawa made their way to the common room. Izuku smiled as he noticed some students giving Aizawa strange looks but remained silent. Aizawa ignored them, silencing the occasional laughter with a glare. When they finally reached the 1A dorm building and opened the common room door, the entire class turned to look at them, then stared at Aizawa. He raised an eyebrow, concerned about how he appeared. Suddenly, Izuku burst out laughing, unable to contain himself any longer. Soon, the whole class joined in, and everyone except a very confused Aizawa was rolling on the floor, laughing uncontrollably. Momo was the first to calm down. She walked over to Aizawa, created a mirror, and handed it to him, only to burst out laughing again. Aizawa looked into the mirror, and his eyes widened at the sight of his new hairstyle. He smashed the mirror onto the ground and glared at Izuku. Taking that as a cue to run, Izuku sprinted away, with Aizawa chasing after him. Come back here, problem child. Why didn't you tell me? You made a fool out of me, the pro hero yelled, pursuing the surprisingly agile kid. Izuku laughed, tears of joy streaming down his face. Just then, the doors opened, and Midnight walked in, laughing at the scene. Don't worry, Shota. We've got everything recorded, she chuckled, noticing Aizawa's glare directed at her. You've what? The class erupted in laughter again as Aizawa sprinted out of the room, chasing Midnight. Izuku collapsed onto the floor, still laughing. After everyone calmed down, which took a while, Bakugo decided to chase Izuku again after realizing the cat whisker prank earlier was his idea. Once that excitement settled, they finally enjoyed dinner, happily chatting about their day, with Izuku sharing his experiences. Later, Bakugo took Izuku to his room, feeling more anxious than ever. Tomorrow was a significant day. Izuku would face challenges, and Bakugo would be there for him, as always. As Izuku fell asleep, Bakugo stared at him for a long time, worried about what the next day would bring. Tomorrow, he would turn 7, and the difficult times would begin. Sunday dawned bright and sunny. Bakugo groaned as he sat up, roughly closing his blinds to block out the sunlight. He looked around and noticed that Izuku wasn't beside him. What the? Bakugo took a deep breath to calm himself. A 7-year-old should be fine. On his own. The school had increased security and installed more cameras since the last incident. Bakugo sighed. This kid was definitely a problem child, as Aizawa called him. He wondered if he was the same way. Was that why they were both labeled problem children? Still concerned about his childhood friend, who was now 7 and missing, Bakugo quickly got dressed, took a shower, and headed to the common room. He didn't know what to expect, but he certainly didn't anticipate finding the entire class crowded in the kitchen area, holding up Izuku as he leaned over the sink. Bakugo's eyes widened, and he rushed over, pushing a few classmates aside. He gently rubbed Izuku's back as the boy struggled. Izuku was crying from the pain and discomfort, and Bakugo closed his eyes, trying to avoid seeing his friend in distress. Eventually, Izuku stopped and fell back against Bakugo. He washed Izuku's face and carried him to the couch, laying him down gently as the boy drifted into a fitful sleep. Bakugo turned to face the stunned class. "Everyone, I need your help," he said. They nodded, waiting for him to continue. "As you probably know, today is his birthday. The recovery girl mentioned he would face significant pain today, but we didn't expect him to be sick and throwing up all day." Bakugo rubbed his temples in frustration, trying to keep his cool. He took a deep breath. "I think we should have an All Might-themed day." Everyone looked at him in confusion. Bakugo sighed again and explained while glancing at the sleeping 7-year-old. "We could watch All Might movies, and everyone could wear any All Might merchandise they have. Bring anything. Deku loves All Might almost as much as he loves me, so this might cheer him up and help him forget about the sickness and pain for a little while." He smirked at the last part. Everyone nodded, smiling. "That's a great idea, Bakugo," Momo exclaimed, and the rest of the class agreed, murmuring their support. Bakugo grinned and turned to the class. "Of course it is. My ideas are always great. They're perfect." Everyone silently groaned but smiled. They rushed off to their rooms to gather their All Might items. Bakugo also headed to his room, knowing that his and Izuku's rooms had the most All Might merchandise. However, he decided to leave Izuku's things untouched, not wanting to face an angry Izuku if anything got dirty while he was asleep. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. Sure, Izuku was kind and shy, but when he got angry, he was terrifying. Minoma and some villains had learned that the hard way. Though Bakugo thought they kind of deserved it. Eventually, everyone returned, and surprisingly, everyone had All Might merchandise, even Mineta. Bakugo brought Izuku's All Might onesie, all of Izuku's All Might toys, which were the pens from Bakugo's room still a lot, though, an All Might-themed mat, shoes, a bag, socks, and many other items. Other students brought pillows, blankets, onesies, clothes, hats, toys, plushies, headbands, movies to watch, and plenty of other things. While Izuku was still sleeping, Bakugo and the class set up all the blankets, pillows, and plushies around the couches and prepared the movie. They arranged all the toys around the TV and dressed up. Bakugo then gently woke up Izuku, who quickly ran to the kitchen and felt unwell. He returned and noticed the entire setup. The class smiled widely as he grinned, his eyes sparkling. "Wow!" he exclaimed, jumping onto Bakugo and landing them both on the couch. Bakugo smiled and hugged him as Kirishima started the first movie. During the movie, the real All Might walked into the common room to check why everything was so quiet, but when he saw the scene he smiled and quietly left, tears in his eyes. The class enjoyed drinks and snacks while watching All Might movies for 4 hours. Izuku felt unwell 3 times during that time, but the class paused the movie each time he went to the kitchen sink, so he felt very happy. After the 4 hours of movies, everyone decided to play games. They sat around the pillows and blankets, playing Never Have I Ever, Truth or Dare, and Hide and Seek, eventually even getting to play tag. At 5 p.m., the whole class groaned and collapsed onto the floor, exhausted from all the fun they had. Izuku's stomach rumbled, prompting everyone to have dinner and head to their rooms for an early bedtime. They enjoyed dinner, which consisted of pork cutlet bowls, and Izuku got his favorite katsudon. Bakugo, knowing he needed to prepare for what was about to happen, sneaked out to his room and set everything up, All Might-themed blankets on his bed, All Might plushies, pillows, and toys also on the bed, Izuku's favorite snacks and drinks, their childhood photos placed around the bed, a playlist of Izuku's favorite songs playing softly in the background, All Might posters on the walls, and even Izuku's 15-year-old clothes from his room, placed next to the bed for when he was ready to dress. Bakugo felt nervous and embarrassed at the thought of seeing Izuku in a vulnerable state, but he shook away the thought as he focused on the pain he was about to face. He sighed, looking at everything he had worked hard on, and slowly turned around, checking if he had forgotten anything. Satisfied, he walked back to the common room. There, he glanced at the time and saw it was 6. He frowned when he realized they had about 30 minutes before the moment arrived. Bakugo approached Izuku, who was already dozing off in his chair, smiled, then regained his serious and worried expression as he looked at the class. They all nodded at him for reassurance, and he sighed, nodding back. He lowered his gaze to the sleepy boy and lifted him into his arms. Izuku sleepily opened his eyes, looking up at Bakugo. "Kachin? Where are we going?" he asked, yawning. Bakugo smiled softly, feeling sad that this child didn't know what was coming. "We're going to my room." "You seem tired," he mumbled. Izuku nodded. "Yeah. I had so much fun today," he giggled, recalling the day's events. Bakugo sighed again and carried the boy to his room, gently placing him onto his bed and closing the door. Izuku looked around and gasped. "Wait, why is everything I love here?" he exclaimed. Bakugo sighed. "You'll see he glanced at his watch, in 10 minutes. He sighed sadly and crawled into bed, hugging Izuku. Confused, Izuku hugged back. They sat like that until Izuku flinched. Bakugo frowned, knowing the time had come. Izuku's eyes watered as he felt a sharp pain intensify. Flinch. Again as another wave of discomfort shot through him. Grabbing onto Bakugo tightly, he whispered, "Kachin. What is this?" He squeezed Bakugo's shirt in his hands. Bakugo sighed and hugged him tighter. "It's growing. A quirk aftereffect. It will be over soon, don't worry," he whispered back, scrunching his eyes shut as Izuku cried out. "Shoo, stay strong for me now. You can do it." Izuku's eyes remained wide open as he stared at the wall, tears streaming down his face from the pain. He stayed frozen, overwhelmed by the intensity of it. Then his body began to shake, and he cried out again, the discomfort becoming unbearable. Bakugo squeezed his eyes shut, feeling pain himself just from watching Izuku suffer. Tears rolled down Bakugo's cheeks, but he ignored them and held Izuku closer. The boy cried and screamed, fading in and out of consciousness. In just 10 minutes, he had already grown into a 12-year-old. Bakugo kept his eyes shut, never daring to look at the boy. Izuku coughed, feeling more pain surge through him. He let out a painful cry, and the class and teachers in the building listened in silence, their hearts heavy with concern. Suddenly, Izuku moved himself to the side, nearly hitting the desk nearby, but Bakugo caught him just in time, tightening his embrace. Then, Izuku stopped, his body still shaking, eyes wide and mouth open. He slowly relaxed, closing his eyes and mouth as his arms fell to his sides and his head rested on Bakugo's shoulder. Tears continued to roll down his face as he slumped fully onto Bakugo, unconscious. Bakugo held the boy in silence, tears streaming down his own face. After a moment, he gently laid the now 15-year-old boy onto his bed and dressed him in his normal clothes. Bakugo frowned at the sight of Izuku's red, swollen, and bruised body, now marked with stretch marks. He carefully positioned him on the bed, placing his head on the pillow. Then Bakugo lay down next to him, hugging him close. "Oh, Izuku. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you." Izuku POV. "I woke up feeling dizzy and unwell. I shot up and stumbled into a nearby door, relieved to find it was a bathroom. I rushed to the toilet and retched, feeling as if I might lose everything inside me. After washing my face, I realized I had no idea where I was, what time it was, or why I felt so terrible. I face-bombed silently and walked out of the bathroom." Loud gasp. "Oh my goodness." I tried to hold back a scream as I saw that the room belonged to my longtime crush and childhood best friend, Bakugo, who was asleep on his bed. I stumbled backward, nearly fainting from the shock and nausea, but managed to steady myself against the wall. Taking a deep breath, I calmed down and slid down to the floor. Okay, so one question answered. I'm in Bakugo's room. Now, what time is it? I looked around and spotted Bakugo's digital clock on his desk. It read 6:46 a.m. Alright, that's 2 questions answered. Now, what day is it? Is it a school day? I hope not. I reached for my phone, only to realize it wasn't in my pocket. Groaning, I decided to do this the hard way. Ignoring the pounding headache and dizziness, I walked over to Bakugo's desk. He was an organized person, so he would definitely have a calendar. Maybe I could find something that would help me figure out the date. As I reached for the calendar, I flinched at the sound of movement behind me. Turning slowly, I paled when I saw Bakugo sitting up, staring at me. Deku? What are you doing at my desk? He said calmly, looking at me. I gulped. Making Bakugo angry was not a good idea. I don't remember anything, so I was checking the calendar for the date. I mumbled, fumbling with my fingers. Bakugo groaned. I forgot you don't remember anything. He yawned and stretched his arms. I didn't know what to expect, but I certainly didn't anticipate Bakugo sitting me down next to him and explaining how I had apparently been hit with an aging quirk and everything that had happened over the past week. As he finished his lengthy explanation, he sighed and covered his face with his hands. Sorry. I kinda saw you when you grew to a 15-year-old. Sorry about that. He mumbled, and I felt my face heat up. My crush had seen me like that. I exhaled shakily, and Bakugo raised an eyebrow at me. What's wrong with you? He grumbled. I blinked, averted my gaze, and rubbed my neck. Nothing to. I replied. The silence stretched until I sighed and leaned forward, hugging Bakugo. Thanks for looking after me. Tears streamed down my face as I spoke. My mom told me I was a handful, so I think it would have been tough. Thank you for taking care of me, Bakugo, I exclaimed, suddenly aware of my actions. I blushed and wanted to pull away, but then his arms wrapped around me, pulling me close. I melted into the embrace. You're welcome, stupid Deku. Bakugo sighed. You really were a handful. He grumbled the last part and I giggled. Suddenly, his arms began to trace patterns on my back as I leaned into the touch. I closed my eyes, wishing this moment could last forever. Deep down, I knew Bakugo was probably still half asleep and unaware of what he was doing. But then I realized he wasn't just tracing, he was writing letters. It felt as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. I focused, trying to recognize the letters. The first was a simple line, which I guessed was either a capital I or a lowercase l. But Bakugo was always precise with his grammar, so I settled on I. He paused, indicating a new word. I leaned closer, feeling comforted by his presence. The next letter was another line, and since it couldn't be a capital letter in the middle of a sentence, I recognized it as an L. Then I felt a round shape, a perfect circle. That's definitely an O. I smiled, proud of myself for deciphering 3 letters. Next was a zigzag, ending sharply. That must be a V. Another one. The following letter was a swirl, and without much thought, I recognized it as an E. Then came another pause, signaling the next word. I grinned as his finger drew an upward motion, then swung down with a hook at the end. I furrowed my brows, unsure if it was a G or a Y. I waited for him to repeat the pattern and smiled when I determined it was a Y. Next was another circle, so another O. Bakugo's hand then drew a line similar to a circle but sharper at the end. That had to be a U. The pattern started again and I concentrated on the letters. So, first I, then O, V, E, then Y, O, U. Then it repeated. I smiled happily, having decoded the message. Suddenly I froze. Wait, what? I shot straight up, staring into Bakugo's crimson eyes. He gasped slightly, surprised by my sudden movement. His eyes widened as he realized I had decoded his message. We stared at each other, wide-eyed, but then I smiled a big, bright smile. Bakugo tilted his head in confusion. I grinned. This has to be a dream. Bakugo! I love you too! I exclaimed, flinging myself into him for a tight hug. Bakugo fell silent at my confession, gasping slightly as I clung to him. He then regained his composure and hugged me back. I felt tears? Yes, tears running down Bakugo's cheeks. I started crying too. I thought this would never happen. Bakugo whispered. They lived happily ever after. The story is now finished, my friends. Thank you so much for reading and for all the votes. I've never had a story gain that much attention so quickly, and it truly makes me happy. Thank you. I'm excited to write another story about Izuku as a vigilante. I love the idea. Anyway, thanks again for reading, and take care of yourselves.